Hello and welcome to Complaining About Comics. Now, in the new episodes that are coming up, we're going to talk about Before Watchmen. Originally, I wanted to do this as a long piece with all of the Before Watchmen stories, but because of the sheer amount of information, it's better to just release them all in separate episodes for each one. So, in this episode, we're going to cover the comedian. Now, the comedian appears in more than one story, and instead of going through all of them, we'll talk about the comedian when he comes up in those stories on those episodes instead of his whole timeline. So in this episode, we're just talking about the comedian's story. The comedian's story. Yeah, comedian's story is a little strange, partly because it basically deals with comedian's relationship with political figures, mostly the Kennedys and his time in Vietnam. Its basic story is comedian is having a football game with the Kennedys. He has a conversation with Jackie Kennedy. Jackie Kennedy has him kill some prostitute that's, I guess, sleeping with John F. Kennedy. And then it goes from there to him going after Moloch, which is a setup for it to get him away from John F. Kennedy, who gets assassinated. And then after that, he goes to Vietnam. Long story short, for Vietnam, he basically goes there. He's cocky. He does drugs. In the drug-fueled rage or insanity of it, he basically goes on a killing spree. This is all brought on by him coming back to America. He sees a protest, and the protest is protesting Vietnam, and then these pro-war protesters show up and start attacking this girl who looks like his daughter. And then sort of in what Watchmen happened, where he believed everything was a joke or life was a joke and it didn't matter what he did. So he goes back to Vietnam. He kills everybody in a village. The government believes that this is going to be damaging to the public as in general, and so they basically suppress it. And after that, he comes back. He does one stint with the new Watchmen, and he basically is just Rorschach and Night Owl. They take on a pack called the Rat Pack. The comedian beats them to it, and then he kills like most of the Rat Pack and leaves one alive, and then he walks away. Then his story kind of gets to the end where it's about Bobby Kennedy, where Bobby Kennedy is going to tell the press if he loses or wins the presidential election what happened in Vietnam, and he's going to basically throw comedian onto the bus for the credibility of the United States. And then comedian learns that Bobby Kennedy is going to be assassinated, and so he tells Bobby Kennedy, but he tells him while he's doing security for him at the event where he's going to be executed. He does it moments before he's executed, and then he gets shot at. Right after he's shot at, you see a comedian with a gun to Bobby Kennedy's head, and it's assumed that he killed Bobby Kennedy. And that's how the story ends. Time to talk about the construction of the comic comedian. Now, comic structure isn't that complicated. You basically read from left to right. We use the word bubbles as sort of arrows for where your eyes should go, and then panel construction is done to basically lead your eyes across the page. Now, comedian's comic has all this. It has some like double page spreads, which has you read across the pages all the way across to the other page, which are confusing and annoying. But overall, the art's decent. It's not great, but it's decent. And the story seems to have some problems, though. It's like the writer was losing tread with what he was writing. So it's a bit confusing at certain points. The writing just is meaningless. You don't even have to read the words. You just have to follow the page and look at the drawings. But other than that, it's a decent comic. As for a read, I don't really like it. It's not that interesting of a comic story. It doesn't really add much to the Watchmen universe, and I could have lived with skipping it. So I'm really not that thrilled by the story. It's just interesting art, and yeah, interesting art. That's basically it. Some of the designs for comedian are really good, especially his jungle camo, but other than that, the whole thing's kind of meaningless to me. Okay, that was the comedian. Tune in next time for other stories of Before Watchmen.